All right, YouTube, once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast Talking Auburn Football. I had a few thoughts after my final prediction show a little bit ago about the Auburn versus Florida football game. As always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger War Eagle. This rivalry is kind of a interesting rivalry here in the SEC where you talk about domination. Especially on the side of the Florida Gators. You talk about the early 90s on into the early 2000s. Florida pretty much ruled that rivalry 9 games out of 12, winning 8 straight. And those 8 straight were not even close. That was during the Steve Spurrier era where they won a couple of SEC championships and also got a national championship during that particular time. Probably had more than a couple of SEC championships, really not in the mood to go into the details of that. But needless to say, Florida was absolutely dominant over the SEC, kind of similar to what you're seeing. Not quite exact, but similar to the reign of terror that Alabama has garnished over the SEC over the last few years. But recently, Auburn has won 3 straight, 2 of those games being in Jordan-Hare Stadium. One of those, the huge win, 2007, where Wes Byram got the winning field goal there. And you start to think about a role reversal as far as not necessarily the dominance of the teams, but the perception of the teams. Auburn is going into this game as the number 7 ranked team in the country. Florida's number 10 for the first time in the Swamp. Florida's actually an underdog in a top 10 matchup in their home stadium. Auburn Tigers, are you buying or are you selling them? Because so far, Auburn has improved from week to week, have shown some vulnerabilities, especially against the blitz. Bo Nix at times kind of errant in his decisions, but has managed to, avoid being sacked. He's also managed to avoid turnovers. He hadn't had a turnover since the Oregon game where he had 2 interceptions. And you also talk about where Auburn is as a program and the personnel that's on the field. I'd go and say that Auburn has the best personnel on the football field right now because you have an overlap of talent that goes all the way back to the 2015 recruiting class. The offensive line for Auburn have been there since then. You talk about 2016 and 2017 where Marlon Davidson and you got guys like Jeremiah Denson, Daniel Thomas. All of those guys have played in very huge games in their tenure at Auburn. And I just don't think from a mentality standpoint, going into the Swamp, yes, it's going to be loud. And yes, it's still going to be intimidating. And these are young kids and it's going to be high energy. The key for the Auburn Tigers is to not let the moment get away from you. I think about Georgia back in 2017 when they came into Auburn as the number 1 team in the country and a lot of pressure in that particular game. And Georgia just, really did not meet expectation of the way they like to play football in that game. You have costly turnovers in that game for Georgia. You also have, uncharacteristic pressure that Auburn put on Jake Fromm that he wasn't accustomed to. And mind you, 2 years ago, some of the guys that are still on this team now played on that particular team. Played in the SEC championship game against Georgia. Also were a part of the historic, victories over number 1 teams in, a 3-week span. So you have all of that experience. And then now it's time for Auburn to cash in. I don't know if you guys understand the concept of compound interest where you start to get experience, and then all of a sudden things just kind of explode for you on from a production standpoint and as far as a result standpoint. And so far, Auburn in the SEC matchups, mind you, these are games that the media pundits thought early in the season, before the season started, thought that these were games that Auburn would struggle with. Auburn straight up ran through Texas A&M. Don't let the score fool you. There was complete domination in that particular game. Of course, Auburn had some stuff going on late in the game to where, Texas A&M had a chance if they would have recovered the onside kick. But for the most part, if you watch that game, Auburn in complete control of that game. Also, I even rewatched the Oregon game. Even the Oregon game in the second half, I thought Auburn did a great job of taking control of that game at the line of scrimmage, started to establish the run game and give themselves an opportunity to kind of right the wrongs of the first half. One, a couple of things that people are not taking into consideration. Auburn allowed Oregon to flip the field with those punt returns early. Because of that, Auburn has improved since, but because of that, Auburn was one of the worst teams at punt coverage in the country. Almost cost them that game. Had it not been for an errant run pass option by Justin Herbert, you're probably looking at a different Auburn-Oregon game. The tone of this conversation would probably be different, because what you would be looking at is losing to Oregon, somewhat of a demoralizing type situation, where you have seniors who have come back, having the opportunity to go play pro football, coming back, losing a game like Oregon, and now the season's trajectory is a lot different. Yeah, I think you beat Kent State and you beat Tulane, but because of the mentality, the games against Texas A&M and Mississippi State become a little bit more questionable. But now fast forward to this week, one of the biggest weeks in college football, especially in October. All the weeks are big because the consequences start to crescendo, so to speak, as each week goes by. Auburn in a top 10 matchup. I think from a personnel standpoint, Auburn is better. Auburn has the better defensive line across the board. Don't get me wrong. I think Zuniga and a couple of other guys for Florida are very good. They're very good football players. But as far as domination and as far as how the defensive line combines with a more athletic linebacker core for Auburn, I think you got to give Auburn the edge on this, which is why I talk about the role reversal in this particular game, because in the early 2000s, I was actually a student at Auburn during this time. And when, Auburn played against Florida, it was a situation where you felt like Auburn had to play the game of their lives to have a chance to win. Just look at the numbers. Between 92 and 2002, when Florida won the game, it was double-digit wins, including beating Auburn twice in 2000 by double digits, one of those in the SEC championship. But I think the roles are starting to reverse, and I think the media fan bases are just not fathoming the concept of Auburn coming into Gainesville as a favorite. With the experience that I had with looking at Auburn and Florida, I can't grasp it either. So when you have conversations in the media where, you're saying Auburn should win this game by 2 touchdowns in the swamp, that's unheard of in this particular rivalry. But it could be reality. Auburn has a lot to offer in the skill position, multiple running backs that they can go to. You're starting to see an emergence with DJ Williams. He has 7 carries, 32 yards, not necessarily that spectacular, but he adds another element to this Auburn run game. Most of the time in the SEC, when you're a defense, you have to contend against one really good running back, maybe a pretty good set of receivers. And, it's pretty easy, pretty simple to prepare for. You know what is coming at you. But when you have an offense that is diverse and that is so personnel driven as Auburn's offense, honestly, it's hard to prepare for. Yes, I get it. C.J. Henderson, all SEC potential cornerback, is coming back. Great. Jabari Zuniga is coming back. That is spectacular. And I think they will have impact on the game. Because when you're missing guys like those, it does have an impact on your defense. I think the Florida fans need to look back to the Michigan game where they had 3 of their key starters out. I think that game is totally different if those guys would have been there, especially their running back. So I look at a strange role reversal in this Auburn-Florida rivalry. We're so used to doing the Auburn versus Florida game, and genuinely, wholeheartedly predicting a game like this where Florida is an overwhelming favorite. We know Auburn tends to play well against Florida, but never favorite to beat Florida. Not to the level that even people that bet on this thing are looking at. Are they saying things like Auburn is the better team? Auburn has the better defense. All of those narratives are uncharacteristic of the Auburn and Florida rivalry. That's why when you get on, social media or you're a sports head and you say things like Auburn will dominate or, Florida's offensive line has zero chance against Auburn's defensive line, you're kind of looked at with a side eye, not because you don't know what you're talking about. It's because of history. This is something that's unprecedented. To say that Auburn is going to beat Florida at home wholeheartedly without flinching is something that's uncharacteristic to this particular rivalry. It usually takes a really, really good game on Auburn's part to have a chance. So we can't get away from that part of the, subconscious minds of the fans on both sides. Because honestly, Auburn fans don't even believe it. Auburn fans, they see it on the field. They see that this is one of the better defenses that Auburn has had, at least athletically, in quite some time across the board. They see a two-deep situation at the defensive line where Auburn can rest Derrick Brown for an ungodly amount of time and still not lose a beat. They see Noah Igbenogany, one of the best position changes in Auburn, probably recent Auburn history, former wide receiver, now a cornerback, could be in a position to be in the, conversations for all SEC, maybe dark horse All-American. This stuff is unheard of. And when you talk like this as an Auburn analyst or an Auburn fan, you come off as delusional. You come off as arrogant. Who the heck do you think you are? Talking this stuff about Florida being an underdog against Auburn. Yeah, we see Vegas. Vegas doesn't know what they're talking about, right? No way Auburn covers the spread. No way Auburn scores 30-plus points against Florida. But it could be a reality, guys. Yes, Bo Nix has made some mistakes on the road. Hasn't been particularly, accurate, especially when the pressure is on. But the play calling has changed since the Oregon game. You have guards pulling now. You have Gus Malzahn getting very comfortable with what he wants his offense to look like. And that could be a danger zone for the Florida Gators, who some Florida fans are not willing to take a really microscopic look at this defense, but they've had some vulnerabilities. Quarterbacks have been able to execute run-pass option against Florida. Teams have been able to convert on the perimeter against Florida with Zuniga and C.J. Henderson in the football game. A lot of Florida fans, I get it. Yes, Florida is a great program. Florida has a great tradition of, doing things really well on the gridiron. Now, this is not to say that Florida, could come miraculously show me something different than what I've seen on video footage. And those things can happen. You think about Auburn against Tennessee last year. No way Tennessee should have beat Auburn, but they did. And how did they do it? Auburn making mistakes. Auburn putting themselves in a position where the game is close late. And now Tennessee has a chance. I think Florida has a very good football team. But there are a lot of things that folks are just not taking into consideration. Auburn is a good football team as well. And I think we need to start buying into the fact that no matter the outcome of this particular football game, Auburn has changed the trajectory of how they approach football. Much more aggressive, definitely easier to watch. My goodness. I think about the offense. Even with Bo Nix scrambling for his life at times early in the season, even with Booby Whitlow with struggles getting the offense going because Gus Malzahn kind of going with a base type offense, seeing what happens. But Auburn is actually easier to watch. It takes me back to the mid 2000s, between 2004 and say 2009, right before the whole debacle with Tommy Tuberville. No, Auburn did not win the national championship. They won one SEC championship during that time, but 2005, 2006, 2007, Auburn was so much more easier to watch. We love that's as a matter of fact, my little brother actually, he didn't know, you know what I'm saying? He's about 10, 12 years younger than me. Actually, Kirsten is 12 years younger than me. And big shout out to DJ K-Mo. That's what he goes by now. He's actually a DJ out in Huntsville. Go ahead and support him if you're out in the area. But either way, Kirsten, became an Auburn fan because of how intense that time was. He saw games like the one where Auburn comes back against LSU, and he saw how passionate I was about Auburn football. And there were a lot of things that molded the recent perception of Auburn football during that particular time. Guys, it's time to stand up. Auburn is not a bad football team. Auburn is not a bad football program. One of the reasons that, kind of drove me to even create this channel is the fact that I want folks to know that Auburn is coming. Win or lose. That part of the being an Auburn fan and being an Auburn alumnus, that a spirit that's not afraid. I believe in Auburn and love it. That's real deal, guys. And this weekend, Auburn football has to put the world on notice that no, we're no longer, and it's starting to vibrate, that Auburn is done with being a subordinate football team in the SEC. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast talking Auburn football. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you like Auburn football ad nauseum, you will subscribe and tune in to every bit of the conversation. Got some great subscribers that provide some very good insight in the comment section. And as always, War Eagle.